You cannot sleep because the silence in your room is the wrong kind of silence. It presses against your ears with a weight that feels almost industrial, manufactured by the absence of machines rather than the presence of peace. The refrigerator hums in another room. The heating system clicks on and off with mechanical precision. Outside, a car passes, its tires hissing against pavement still wet from earlier rain. These sounds do not disturb you exactly. They are too familiar for that. But they do not comfort you either. They simply exist around you, each one isolated, each one unconnected to anything that might anchor you to the moment or to the room or to the feeling that you belong in this particular place at this particular time. You scroll through your phone in the darkness, the blue light casting strange shadows across your face. And somewhere in the back of your mind, you recognize that you are looking for something that cannot be found in the small rectangle of glass in your hand. You are looking for a story that will hold you, not entertain you, not inform you, not distract you from the restlessness that has become so constant you barely notice it anymore, except in moments like this, when sleep will not come, and you are alone with the particular emptiness of a late hour in a room that knows nothing about you. The videos you watch are 7 seconds long, then 15, then 3 minutes if you are patient. Each one offers you a fragment, a joke without context. A face you will never see again, expressing an emotion that dissolves the moment you swipe upward. A fact delivered with urgency about a subject you will forget before morning. The algorithm knows you better than you know yourself, or so it claims, but what it offers you is not connection. It is the simulation of connection, the caloric equivalent of human warmth without any of the nutrition. And some part of you understands this even as you continue scrolling, continue searching, continue hoping that the next piece of content will be the one that finally satisfies the hunger you cannot name. You do not remember when you stopped telling stories to the people in your life, not performing them, not recounting them with practiced timing and theatrical pauses, but simply telling them, letting them unfold in the space between you and another person as naturally as breathing. The stories you consume now come to you complete, edited, packaged for maximum efficiency. They have been written by professionals and delivered by actors and compressed into formats designed to hold your attention for exactly as long as market research suggests you are willing to give it. And when they end completely. There is no space for you in them, no room for your questions or your interpretations or your own memories that might echo against the narrative and create something larger than either the story or your experience alone. You think sometimes about the conversations you used to have before everyone carried a reference library in their pocket, the arguments that would stretch across an entire evening, because no one could immediately prove who was right about the year a movie was released or the name of that actor who played the supporting role in that television show no one had thought about in a decade. Those arguments were not really about the facts. They were about the pleasure of uncertainty, the strange intimacy of not knowing together, of building a collective memory that might be wrong, but was yours, shared, held in common, like something precious and fragile. Now, when a question arises, someone reaches for their phone, and the answer appears in seconds, and the conversation dies. The fact arrives like a period at the end of a sentence no one wanted to finish. There is no more room for speculation, for the slow building of possibilities, for the way a story grows when multiple people tend to it, each one adding their own details, their own mistakes, their own misremembered fragments that somehow make the whole thing more true than any objective account could ever be. You have been to dinner parties where everyone sits in the same room, physically present, technically together, and yet the conversation never quite catches fire. It starts and stops. Someone tells an anecdote about their day, and the others listen politely, and then there is a pause, a gap, and someone else fills it with another anecdote, equally isolated, and you realize that you are not building anything together. You are taking turns broadcasting. Each story remains separate, sealed off, A performance for an audience that is already thinking about what they will say when their turn comes. The silence between these performances is nothing like the silence around a fire. You know this without ever having sat around a fire in the way your ancestors did. Just without ever having felt the particular quality of attention that emerges when a group of people gathers in darkness with nothing to do but listen and speak and tend the flames. But somehow, you know. Somehow, the absence of that experience has left a shape inside you, a negative space where something should be. And late at night when sleep will not come, and the silence in your room presses against you with its empty weight, you feel that absence more clearly than you feel most of the things that are actually present in your life. You are not alone in this feeling. The restlessness is epidemic. Everyone you know is tired in a way that sleep does not fix. They wake up exhausted and go to bed wired, and the hours between are filled with a low-grade anxiety that has no specific object, no clear cause, nothing you could point to and say, There, that is the problem. That is the thing making me feel like I am always slightly outside my own life, watching it happen from a distance that never closes." Some of that anxiety is economic. Some of it is political. Some of it is environmental. The background radiation of living in a moment of history when the future feels more like a threat than a promise. But beneath all of that, quieter and harder to name, is something else. A loneliness that is not about being alone. You can be surrounded by people and feel it. You can be in constant communication, your phone buzzing with messages and notifications, and still sense that you are speaking into a void, that your words are traveling outward into space without ever quite reaching anyone, without ever quite landing. The stories you tell yourself about this feeling are mostly explanations. You are depressed, you are anxious, you are burned out. You need a vacation. You need a new job. You need to exercise more, eat better, sleep on a schedule, practice meditation, practice gratitude, practice self-care. And maybe all of that is true. Maybe all of those things would help. But they do not touch the center of it, the place where the restlessness lives, the sense that something fundamental is missing from the way you move through the world. What if the thing you are missing is not a thing at all? What if it is a kind of space? Not physical space, though that matters too, but social space. The particular quality of attention that used to exist between people when they gathered together with no purpose but to be together. Yeah, to speak and listen and let time pass in a way that was not productive or efficient or optimized for any outcome except the simple fact of being human in the presence of other humans. There used to be a shape to the day that created these spaces naturally. The work ended when the light failed. People came together not because they had scheduled it, but because darkness made them come together, because there was nothing else to do, because the hours between dinner and sleep were hours that had to be filled somehow, and the only resource anyone had was each other. And in those hours, stories happened. Not occasionally, not as entertainment, but as the basic substance of human connection, the way people made sense of their lives and their community and their place in the order of things. You do not have those hours anymore. Your day does not end when the light fails. Your day does not end at all, really. It bleeds into night, and night bleeds into the next day, and the only markers are the ones you create artificially, the routines you impose on yourself, because without them there would be nothing to distinguish one moment from another. You work under artificial light, and you relax under artificial light, and you sleep under the glow of standby LEDs. And somewhere in all of that, you have lost the rhythm that used to tell you when it was time to stop producing and start being, when it was time to gather close and let the darkness outside make the light inside feel precious. The stories you consumed tonight before you gave up and put your phone down were not meant to create that feeling. They were meant to fill time, to keep you engaged, to make you feel something just intensely enough that you would keep watching, keep scrolling, keep feeding the beast of your own attention into the machine that converts human consciousness into data points and advertising revenue. And you know this. You are not naive. But knowing it does not stop you from searching, from hoping that somewhere in the endless stream of content there might be something that feels like nourishment instead of empty calories, something that might hold you the way a good story used to hold people, when stories were not commodities but gifts, passed from one person to another in the darkness, tended and shaped and remembered together. The silence in your room is still the wrong kind of silence. But maybe now, lying here in the dark, you can begin to feel the edges of what is missing. Not to fix it, not tonight. But to recognize it, to acknowledge that the restlessness you feel is not a personal failing or a chemical imbalance or a sign that you are broken in some fundamental way. It is a response to a real absence, a hunger for something that used to be as common as bread, and is now so rare you do not even have good words for it anymore. You do not miss the past because it was easier. The past was not easier, but it gave you a place in the world. And right now, in this moment, in this room, in this silence that presses against you with its manufactured emptiness, you are trying to remember what that felt like. Go back far enough and the fire is the only light for miles. Not street lights. Not the glow of neighboring houses bleeding through curtains. Not the distant orange haze of a city reflecting off low clouds. Just the fire. And beyond it, and darkness so complete it feels like a physical presence, a weight, a reminder of how small and fragile you are, how dependent on this circle of warmth and light that pushes back against the enormous indifference of the night. You are sitting with your people. Not your friends exactly, though you are friendly with them. Not your family, though some of them are related to you by blood. Your people. The ones you depend on and who depend on you. The ones whose survival is tied to your survival in ways that are not metaphorical or emotional, but absolutely literal. If the harvest fails, you all go hungry. If raiders come, you all fight or flee together. If someone gets sick, you all tend to them, or you all risk the spread of whatever is taking them down. There is no calling for help from outside, because there is no outside. There is only this group, this fire, this night. The fire needs tending. Someone adds wood. Someone else shifts a log with a long stick, sending up a spray of sparks that rise into the darkness and disappear. The light flickers across faces, making everyone look strange and familiar at the same time, turning ordinary features into something more archetypal, more essential. You have known these people your entire life. You were born among them. You will die among them, most likely. And yet in this light, they seem almost like strangers, or like gods, or like both at once. The day is done. Not because anyone decided it was done, but because it is done. The light failed. The work stopped. There is nothing more that can be accomplished tonight. No tasks that can be completed in darkness with only firelight to see by. So you sit. And because you are sitting together, because human beings are deeply uncomfortable with shared silence unless something is happening to give it shape, someone begins to speak. It does not matter who. In some sense, it is always the same person, the one who has the gift for it, the one whose voice carries the right weight, whose timing is good, who knows how to hold a pause and when to rush forward and when to let the story rest for a moment so everyone can catch their breath. But in another sense, it could be anyone. Everyone here knows the stories. Everyone has heard them dozens of times, hundreds of times. The stories are not new. Novelty is not the point. The story tonight is about the beginning of things. How the world was made. How your people came to live in this place. Well, how the animals got their shapes, and the stars got their names, and the river learned which way to flow. You know this story. You have known it since you were old enough to understand language. But you lean forward anyway. You listen. And as the voice moves through the familiar phrases, the familiar rhythms, something happens that is hard to explain to someone who has never experienced it. The story stops being something you are listening to and becomes something you are inside of. The boundaries between the teller and the listener Between the past and the present, between the fire circle and the world the story describes, all of those boundaries grow thin, permeable, almost transparent. You are still sitting on the ground, near the fire. You can still feel the cold air on your back and the warmth on your face. But you are also in the story, walking with the ancestors, watching the world take shape, participating in the great unfolding that led to this moment, this fire, this night, these people. This is not escapism. This is not entertainment in the sense you understand that word now, in the sense of something that distracts you from your real life. This is your real life, or at least it is the framework that makes your real life comprehensible. The story is telling you who you are. Not you individually, though that is part of it, but you collectively, you as a people, you as a continuation of something that began long before you were born and will continue long after you are gone. When the story reaches its end, there is no applause. There is no review to post, no rating to assign, and no comment section to scroll through to see what others thought. There is only silence, the good kind now, the kind that feels full rather than empty, the kind that holds the story inside it like water holds light. And then, after a time, someone else speaks. Maybe they tell another story. Maybe they add a detail to the one that just finished, a version they heard from their grandmother that differs slightly from the version everyone just heard. Maybe they make a joke. Maybe they simply comment on the fire, on the weather, on the child who fell asleep during the telling and is now curled against their mother's side. It does not matter. The thread holds. The conversation is not a series of isolated performances. It is a weaving, each contribution building on what came before, referencing it, complicating it, enriching it. And underneath it all, underneath the specific words and the specific stories, there is something deeper happening. You are making meaning together. You are taking the raw fact of your existence in this place at this time, and you are shaping it into something that makes sense, something that has purpose, something that gives each person in the circle a role and a reason and a connection to everything that came before and everything that will come after. This is inclusion in a sense that the word has almost lost in your modern context. It is not about being welcomed into a space. It is not about having your identity acknowledged or your perspective validated. It is about being woven into a story so fundamental, so encompassing, that your individual existence becomes both utterly important and completely secondary at the same time. And you matter because you are part of the whole. The whole matters because it is made of people like you. And the story is the thing that holds these two truths together, without resolving the contradiction between them. The silence around the fire, the good silence, the silence between stories and inside stories and underneath stories. That silence is not the absence of noise. It is the presence of shared attention. Everyone is listening. Everyone is part of the same moment. There is no split screen, no side conversation, no one scrolling through their phone or mentally planning tomorrow or replaying an argument from earlier in the day. There is only this, the fire, the voice, the story, the darkness beyond, and the sense, impossible to prove but impossible to deny, that you are all part of something larger than yourselves, and something that was here before you and will be here after you, something that needs you and will remember you and will carry a piece of you forward even after your name is forgotten. Did they know how rare this was? Did they understand that they were participating in something that would one day seem almost magical to their descendants? Something that future humans would spend enormous amounts of money trying to recreate through retreats and workshops and carefully designed experiences? Probably not. Probably it just seemed normal. Probably they took it for granted the way you take for granted the ability to reach anyone in the world instantly through a device in your pocket. The way you assume that food will be available when you need it and that water will flow when you turn a handle and that lights will come on when you flip a switch. But maybe some of them knew. Maybe on some nights, When the stories were particularly good, and the fire was particularly warm, and the sense of connection was particularly strong, maybe some of them felt it, the preciousness of it, the fragility of it, the way it all depended on everyone participating, everyone paying attention, everyone agreeing to be present in the same moment for no purpose except the purpose of being together. The stories themselves were not always comforting. Many of them were brutal. People died in these stories. Children starved. Warriors failed. Lovers betrayed each other. The gods were capricious and often cruel. The world was full of dangers that could not be avoided or controlled. But the telling of the stories, the act of gathering together and speaking and listening and making meaning together, that was comforting. That created a container strong enough to hold the brutality, the fear, the uncertainty. The story said, terrible things happen. The telling of the story said, but you are not alone in the terror. We are here together. We have always been here together. We will continue to be here together as long as we keep telling the stories, keep tending the fire, keep choosing to gather in the darkness instead of scattering into our separate shelters and facing the night alone. The child sleeping against their mother's side will grow up hearing these stories. They will hear them so many times that the words will become part of their internal landscape, part of the way they think and dream and understand the world. When they face hardship later in life, when they are hungry or afraid or lost, the stories will be there, not as abstract lessons, but as living presences, as real and solid as the memory of their mother's warmth, or the smell of smoke, or the sound of the storyteller's voice rising and falling in the firelight. And when that child grows old and sits in the same circle, telling the same stories to a new generation of children, they will be participating in something that is not just tradition or culture or heritage, though it is all of those things. They will be participating in the basic technology of human meaning-making, the thing that allowed your species to survive and spread across the planet, despite being weaker than most predators and slower than most prey, and less adapted to any particular environment than almost any other creature alive. The stories were not decoration. The stories were infrastructure. They held the knowledge of how to live. They held the shape of the social order. They held the meaning that made all the struggle and suffering and temporary joy of existence feel like part of something larger instead of just noise and chaos and eventual death. You cannot go back to that fire. The distance is not just time. It is ontological. You are not the same kind of being as the person sitting in that circle. Your consciousness has been shaped by literacy, by individualism, by the assumption that you are a sovereign self-making choices in a world of options rather than a single cell in a larger organism, following patterns laid down by ancestors you will never meet. You could sit by a fire tonight. You could gather your friends. You could tell stories. But it would not be the same. It could not be the same. Too much has changed. But recognizing that you cannot go back is not the same as dismissing what was lost. The nostalgia you feel, the sense that something is missing, that is not false consciousness or romantic delusion. It is your nervous system recognizing the absence of something it was shaped by, something it expects, something it still needs in ways that your conscious mind may not fully understand, but your body knows with absolute certainty. The thing about oral tradition that is hardest to explain to someone who has only ever lived in a literate world is that memory worked differently. Not worse, not better, just differently. You did not memorize words the way you memorize them now, as a fixed sequence that must be reproduced exactly, or else you have failed. You memorized patterns, rhythms, images, the bones of the story, and then you fleshed those bones out with language that was fresh each time, responsive to the moment, to the audience, to the way the story wanted to be told on that particular night. The same story told twice was not the same, not in the details, not in the exact phrasing, but it was the same in the ways that mattered. The same core narrative, the same moral weight, the same purpose. This flexibility was not sloppiness, it was precision of a different kind. The story adapted to its context while maintaining its essential truth, the way water adapts to the shape of its container while remaining water. When writing came, it brought tremendous gifts. The ability to preserve information across vast distances and spans of time. The ability to create complex systems of law and governance and trade that could scale beyond the limits of face-to-face interaction. The ability to think in new ways, to hold more variables in mind at once, to build arguments that stretched across hundreds of pages. No one who has ever experienced the pleasure of getting lost in a book would wish writing away. But writing also changed what story meant. A written story was fixed. It existed independent of the teller and the listener. It could be analyzed, dissected, compared to other versions, judged for accuracy or consistency. This was useful in many contexts, but it also meant that stories stopped being something you did together and became something you consumed individually. The story was no longer happening in the space between people. It was happening on the page, and the page was the same for everyone, and your experience of it was private, interior, disconnected from the immediate presence of others. The transition was gradual. For a long time, even after writing was common, most people still experienced stories primarily through oral transmission. They were read to, or they attended performances, or they heard sermons, or they gathered in public houses and heard travellers tell tales of distant lands. The social dimension of story persisted even as the technology changed. But slowly, across centuries, the balance shifted. Reading became silent, solitary, internal. Stories became commodities produced by professionals for mass consumption. The idea emerged that a story belonged to its author rather than to the community that told and retold it. Copyright law codified this idea. If plagiarism became a sin, originality became the highest virtue. The old practice of taking a traditional story and adapting it to your own purposes, adding your own details, making it speak to your own moment, that practice started to look like theft instead of what it had always been, which was simply how stories worked. Something was gained in this transition. Individual genius could flourish in new ways. Stories could be more complex, more nuanced, more carefully crafted. The novel emerged as an art form and produced works of staggering beauty and insight. But something was also lost. Stories stopped being infrastructure and became art. They stopped being the thing that held communities together and became the thing that individuals consumed in private to entertain themselves or to achieve some personal growth or to escape from the pressures of their actual lives. You can see the loss most clearly in what happened to the spaces where stories used to live. The hearth, the center of the home where people gathered for warmth and where stories naturally emerged in the hours between work and sleep, that space disappeared. Homes became larger, more segmented. Central heating meant you did not need to gather around a single source of warmth. Electric light meant you did not need to share the same pool of illumination. Everyone could retreat to their own room, their own lamp, their own book, their own private experience. The village square, the marketplace, the church steps, and all the public spaces where people used to congregate and where news and gossip and stories flowed freely between people, those spaces emptied out. Not all at once, not completely, but enough that the basic pattern changed. Instead of public life being the default and privacy being the exception, privacy became the default, and public life became something you had to deliberately choose, something that required planning and effort and often money. The tavern, the coffee house, the salon, these were attempts to preserve some version of the old gathering spaces in the new urban context. And they worked, to a degree, but they were fundamentally different from what came before. You went to them. You chose to participate. They were not woven into the basic rhythm of daily life in the way that the fire circle had been. You could opt out. Or you could stay home. And increasingly, people did. Television brought story back into the home, but it did not bring back the social dimension of oral tradition. Families might gather around the television, but they were not making meaning together. They were consuming a product. The story was complete before anyone in the room turned on the set. There was no adaptation to the audience, no responsiveness to the moment, no space for participation or interruption or collective interpretation. You watched. You laughed at the jokes that the laugh track told you were funny. You absorbed the narrative that someone else had constructed. And then it ended, and you went to bed, and the next day you might discuss it with someone who had watched the same program. But that discussion was about the thing you had both consumed, not about something you had created together. The internet promised connection, and it delivered connection of a kind. You could find people who shared your interests anywhere in the world. You could participate in conversations that spanned continents. You could tell your own stories and have them reach audiences that would have been unimaginable to your grandparents. But the connection was thin. It was mediated by screens and text and the strange flattening effect of digital communication. The body was absent. The voice was absent. The shared physical space was absent. And without those things, something essential about the nature of story and its role in human life could not be preserved. You are living in the aftermath of this long transformation. You have more access to stories than any human being in history. You can read anything ever written in your language, and much that was written in other languages. You can watch thousands of hours of filmed narrative. You can listen to podcasts while you commute, and audiobooks while you exercise, and stand-up comedy while you do dishes. You are drowning in story. But you are starving for what story used to provide, which was not just narrative, but connection. Not just entertainment, but meaning. Not just information, but a sense of place in the world. The restlessness you feel at night, when sleep will not come, that is not because you lack access to stories. It is because you lack access to the kind of attention that used to surround stories when they were told around fires. The deep, embodied, shared attention that made you feel like you were part of something larger than yourself. The attention that was not divided between the story and your phone and your anxious thoughts about tomorrow. The attention that was total, communal, sacred in the original sense of that word, which meant set apart, special, different from ordinary time. You cannot get that attention from a screen. The screen is designed to fragment your attention, to keep you in a state of perpetual semi-focus, where you are always ready to click on the next thing, always available to be interrupted, always half present in whatever you are doing. This is not an accident. This is the business model. Your attention is the product being sold. The more of it that can be harvested and monetized, the better. And so the platforms that mediate your access to story are incentivized to prevent exactly the kind of deep, sustained, undivided attention that used to characterize the oral tradition. Even when you try to recreate the old conditions, even when you gather your friends and put away your phones and sit around a fire pit in someone's backyard, something is missing. You can feel it. The conversation never quite catches the rhythm. The stories are interesting, but they do not bind. Everyone is trying, but you are all working against the grain of how you have been trained to interact with each other and with narrative. You have learned to be audience members, consumers, critics. You have not learned to be participants in a living tradition that is larger than any individual telling. This is not your fault. This is not a personal failing. This is the result of centuries of change, most of which brought real benefits, and much of which was probably inevitable given the trajectory of technological development and economic organization. But it is still a loss, and the loss is real. And your body knows it even when your mind wants to explain it away or tell you that you are romanticizing the past or remind you that people who sat around fires also died of infections that antibiotics would cure in a week and spent their lives in backbreaking labor and had no choice about who they married or where they lived or what they believed. All of that is true, and still the loss is real. Both things can be true at once. You can be grateful for antibiotics and also grieve for the kind of social belonging that is almost impossible to find in a world built around individual choice and personal autonomy and the marketplace of ideas. While you can appreciate the freedom to read whatever you want whenever you want, and also feel the absence of being held by a story in a room full of people whose presence makes the story mean something it could never mean alone. Think about what it meant to know a story by heart. Not to have memorized it word for word, though that sometimes happened, but to have absorbed it so deeply that it became part of how you thought, part of your internal furniture, part of the lens through which you interpreted everything that happened to you. The stories you heard around the fire were not just narratives you enjoyed. They were the operating system of your consciousness. When something difficult happened, you did not have to figure out how to respond from scratch. The stories gave you templates. And they showed you how people had faced similar challenges in the past. They modeled courage and cowardice, wisdom and foolishness, loyalty and betrayal. They did not tell you exactly what to do, but they gave you a framework for thinking about what to do, a set of categories and values and examples that helped you make sense of your situation and locate yourself within a larger pattern. This was especially important because for most of human history, life was intensely repetitive. You did the same work your parents had done and their parents before them. You faced the same challenges, the same seasons, the same dangers. The stories reflected this repetition. They were not about novelty or innovation or disrupting the status quo. They were about maintaining continuity, about doing what had always been done in the way it had always been done, about finding your place in a pattern that was older than memory. This sounds stifling to your modern ears. You have been taught to value change, growth, progress, the idea that you can and should become someone different and better than who you currently are. The idea that you might live the same life your parents lived, might have the same thoughts and values and experiences, might die without ever having distinguished yourself as an individual. That idea feels like a kind of death. But it did not feel that way to them. Or rather, it did not feel that way most of the time to most of them. The continuity was comforting. The stories gave them a sense of purpose that did not depend on doing anything new or remarkable. You mattered because you were carrying forward something that mattered. You were a link in a chain that stretched back to the beginning of time and forward into a future you would never see. Your individual life was brief and hard and often painful, but it was not meaningless. It was part of the story. And the story was everything. The stories also did something else, something harder to articulate. They created a shared reality. Not just a shared understanding of the facts, though that was part of it, but a shared experience of meaning. When everyone in your community knew the same stories, when those stories were referenced constantly in daily conversation, when every significant event was interpreted through the lens of those stories, you all inhabited the same symbolic universe. You spoke the same language, not just literally, but metaphorically. You could communicate with depth and nuance and layers of meaning because you shared a vast common reference pool. This is almost impossible now. Your references are scattered across a media landscape so vast and fragmented that no single story or set of stories commands universal recognition. You can make a joke or an allusion that seems obvious to you, and the person you are talking to will have no idea what you mean, because they did not watch the same shows, or read the same books, or play the same games. You are all living in separate symbolic universes that occasionally overlap but never fully coincide. This fragmentation has some benefits. It means you can find communities organized around incredibly specific interests and identities. It means you are not constrained by the tastes and values of the majority. But it also means that the baseline level of shared understanding that used to exist between any two people in the same community is gone. You have to work to establish common ground. You have to explain your references. You have to translate your experience into terms the other person can understand. And all of that work creates distance, friction, a sense that true communication is always just slightly out of reach. The oral tradition did not have this problem. The stories were the common ground. Everyone knew them. Everyone had been shaped by them. When someone invoked a story, everyone understood not just the surface narrative, but the layers of meaning beneath it, the way it connected to other stories, the way it spoke to the current situation. The reference was immediate, resonant, rich. It created intimacy without requiring explanation, and the intimacy went both ways. The stories made you legible to each other. When you knew someone's stories, you knew something essential about them, about how they had been shaped, what they valued, how they understood the world. And when you shared stories with someone, when you sat together in the firelight and listened and spoke and let the narratives weave back and forth between you, you were not just exchanging information. You were creating a bond, a mutual recognition, a sense of being part of the same reality. This is what you are missing when the silence in your room feels wrong. Not just the stories themselves, but the web of connection the stories created. The sense of being embedded in a community that shared your symbolic universe and therefore understood you in a way that did not require constant explanation or translation or effort. You are so used to working to be understood that you have forgotten what it feels like to be understood automatically, to speak and have your words land in a context that is already prepared to receive them, to be part of a conversation that is not about establishing common ground, but about exploring the implications of the common ground you already share. The old stories were not always good. Some of them were oppressive. Some of them justified hierarchies and violence and the subordination of people who deserved better. The shared symbolic universe was often purchased at the cost of excluding or silencing those who did not fit the narrative, who could not or would not accept the role the stories assigned to them. The inclusion you feel nostalgic for was real, but it was not universal. Many people were outside the fire circle. Many people were written out of the story or written into it in ways that denied their full humanity. This is important to remember. The nostalgia is not false, but it is selective. It focuses on what was good about the old pattern while forgetting what was bad. And this selectivity is dangerous if it leads you to conclude that the solution is simply to go back, to try to recreate the conditions of the past without acknowledging why those conditions were abandoned in the first place. But you can acknowledge the problems with the past and still grieve for what was lost. You can recognize that the oral tradition excluded people and also recognize that something valuable was destroyed when that tradition faded. You can hold both truths at once. You can feel the weight of both. And you can ask whether there might be some way to recover what was good about the old pattern without resurrecting what was bad, some way to create new forms of shared meaning that are more inclusive and more just, while still providing the deep sense of belonging that your nervous system continues to crave, even in a world that has moved far beyond the fire circle. The stories around the fire were not static. They changed over time, slowly, through the process of repeated telling and retelling. A detail would be added here, dropped there. A character would become more prominent or less. The meaning would shift subtly as the community's needs changed, as new challenges arose, as the old templates stopped quite fitting the new realities. This evolution was not random. It was guided by what resonated, what worked, what people wanted to hear again. The stories that survived were the ones that continued to serve some purpose, that continued to help people make sense of their lives. The ones that stopped being useful faded away, not through any deliberate decision, but simply through the natural process of people choosing not to tell them anymore. In this way, the oral tradition was alive in a sense that written tradition can never quite match. A book is fixed. Once published, it exists in that form forever, or at least until all the copies are destroyed. You can write a new edition with changes, but the old edition is still out there, and people will notice the differences and argue about which version is better or more authentic. The written word resists change, but a spoken story changes every time it is told, and there is no original version to compare it to. No ear text that can be consulted to determine what the story really is. The story is whatever it becomes in the mouths of the people who tell it. It belongs to everyone and no one. It is common property in the deepest sense. This fluidity is what allowed the stories to serve as infrastructure for meaning-making. If they had been fixed, they would have become brittle, unable to adapt to new circumstances. But because they could change, they could grow with the community, could incorporate new experiences and new understandings while maintaining continuity with the past. When you tell someone a story now, you usually tell it the way you heard it or read it. You might add your own commentary, your own interpretation, but you maintain the distinction between the story itself and what you think about the story. The story is over there, separate from you, and you are over here, responding to it. This separation is fundamental to how you have been trained to think about narrative. But around the fire, the distinction was less clear. The story was not separate from the telling. The telling was the story. And because you had heard the story many times and would hear it many more times, you knew that no single telling was definitive. Each telling was an instance of the story, a manifestation of it, but not the story itself. The story was larger than any telling, are existing in some platonic realm of pure narrative that could only be accessed through the imperfect medium of human speech and human memory and human presence. This gave the listener a different relationship to the story. You were not trying to memorize it exactly. You were trying to absorb its essence, to understand its shape and rhythm and purpose so that you could tell it yourself one day, adding your own voice to the long chain of voices that had carried it from the past into the present and would carry it from the present into the future. And this meant that listening was not passive. You were not just receiving information. You were participating in a transmission, preparing yourself to become a transmitter. The story was passing through you, and then you were changing it slightly just by the act of hearing it and holding it and preparing to pass it on. You were part of the story's life cycle. This is completely different from how you experience story now. Now, you are always audience, never participant. You watch the movie, or read the book, or listen to the podcast, and your role is to receive what has been created for you by someone else. You can respond to it, share it, recommend it, critique it, but you cannot change it. It is not yours. It belongs to whoever created it, and they maintain control over its form and meaning. There are exceptions, of course: fan fiction, remixes, memes. These are all ways that people try to reclaim some of the participatory relationship with story that used to be the default. But they exist at the margins. They're tolerated by copyright law through fair use exceptions, but always under the shadow of potential legal action if they go too far. And they are still mediated by technology, by the screen, by the distance between creator and audience. What you cannot easily recreate is the physical presence, the face-to-face transmission, the way a story changes in response to the specific people in the room on that specific night. When you tell a story to someone in person, you watch their face. You notice when they lean in and when they pull back. You adjust your pacing, your emphasis, your choice of details based on their reaction. The story becomes a collaboration, even though only one person is speaking. The listener's presence shapes the telling. This feedback loop does not exist in the same way when you are consuming mass-produced narrative. The creator made their choices long before you arrived on the scene. Your reactions, your interests, your need for the story to go a different direction, none of that can influence what you are experiencing. You can only accept or reject what is offered. And so you are always slightly outside the story instead of inside it. Always audience instead of participant. Always consuming instead of creating. And this distance, this separation, this fundamental passivity in your relationship to narrative, it changes what story can do for you. It can entertain you. It can move you. It can make you think. But it cannot hold you the way the old stories held people. Cannot make you feel like you are part of something larger than yourself. cannot give you the sense that your existence is woven into a pattern that will continue after you are gone. The fire is dying now. The flames have subsided into coals that glow deep red in the darkness. The heat is still there, radiating outward, but it is gentler now, less insistent. People are getting ready to sleep. Some have already gone to their shelters. Others are lingering, not quite ready to leave the circle, not quite ready to face the cold and the dark alone. Someone tells one last story, a short one, a quiet one. Not the grand narratives of creation or heroism or the great deeds of ancestors. Just a small story about something that happened recently. A child who said something funny. A clever solution to a problem that had been vexing someone. A moment of beauty that someone witnessed while out gathering food or water or firewood. The kind of story that will not be remembered next week. And that serves no purpose except to bind this moment, these people, this night. And then, even that fades into silence. The good silence now. The kind that feels like rest instead of emptiness. The kind that holds everyone together even as they separate into their individual sleep, their individual dreams. You, lying in your bed in the present moment, in your modern room with its electric lights and its central heating and its walls that separate you from your neighbors, you can almost feel it. The echo of that belonging, the ghost of that peace. Your ancestors sat around fires like that for hundreds of thousands of years. Long before they developed agriculture or cities or writing or any of the technologies that define your modern life, they gathered in darkness around fire and they told stories and they made meaning together. Your nervous system was shaped by that experience. Your capacity for language, for narrative, for symbolic thought, all of it evolved in that context, in those fire circles, in those long nights of shared attention. You are only a few generations removed from people who still lived that way, who still knew what it felt like to have their place in the world secured by story rather than by achievement or accumulation or individual identity. Your great-great-grandparents, or perhaps their parents, they might have experienced something close to the old pattern. The transition happened so fast. In evolutionary time, it happened yesterday. Your body has not caught up. Your body is still waiting for the fire, for the circle, for the voice rising and falling in the darkness, and for the sense that you are part of something that will remember you and carry you forward even after your individual consciousness has dissolved back into the darkness from which it came. This is what the restlessness is, not a flaw in you, not a chemical imbalance or a character defect or a failure to adjust to the modern world. It is your body recognizing the absence of something it was designed for, something it still needs, something that was part of the basic architecture of human experience for almost all of human history, and is now so rare that most people go their entire lives without ever feeling it. You cannot bring back the fire circle. The world that created it is gone. The social structures that supported it are gone. The rhythms of life that made it natural and necessary are gone. You cannot go back. And perhaps you would not want to even if you could. The past was hard in ways you can barely imagine. The constraints were real. The suffering was real. The early death was real. The lack of choice was real. But you can acknowledge what was there. You can name it. You can recognize that the hunger you feel is not for some imaginary golden age, but for a specific human experience that was once common and is now rare. The experience of being held by a story in the presence of others. The experience of shared attention. The experience of meaning that is not individual, but communal. The experience of belonging to something larger than yourself that nonetheless knows you, includes you, needs you. And maybe, just maybe, acknowledging the hunger is the beginning of finding new ways to feed it. Not by recreating the past, which is impossible and probably undesirable, but by understanding what the past provided and finding new forms that can provide something similar. New kinds of gathering, new kinds of attention, new kinds of story that honor the old functions while adapting to new circumstances. This is not a prescription. There is no simple solution to the loss you feel, but there is clarity. You know now what you are missing. You know why the silence in your room feels wrong. You know what your body is craving when sleep will not come and you scroll through your phone looking for something that will never quite satisfy. You are missing the hearth. Not the physical hearth, though that is part of it, but the hearth as symbol, as social form, as the place where people gathered and stories bound them together, and the darkness outside made the light inside feel precious. You are missing the sense of being part of a story larger than yourself, a story that was there before you and will be there after you, a story that gives your life meaning, not because of what you accomplish, but simply because you are part of it, because you showed up, because you listened and spoke and tended the fire alongside everyone else who was there. The modern world gave you many things your ancestors could not have imagined. Freedom of movement, freedom of thought, access to information and experiences and opportunities that would have seemed like magic to someone living 500 years ago. But it took away the fire circle, and the loss is real, and your restlessness is a testimony to that loss, a signal from deep in your nervous system that something essential is missing. You do not have to fix it tonight. You cannot fix it tonight. But you can rest in the knowledge that the hunger is not your fault. The restlessness is not a personal failing. The sense that something is wrong is actually your body being right, being honest, being true to what it was shaped by and what it still needs. Let yourself imagine it one more time, not as a fantasy of escape, but as a memory your body carries even though you were never there. The fire is low now, just embers. The circle has mostly dispersed. You are lying under the stars, wrapped in whatever provides warmth in this place and time, and you can still hear the voices of your people nearby, murmuring, settling, the small sounds of a community preparing for sleep. You are safe. Not because you have locked doors and alarm systems and police who will come if you call them. You are safe because you are not alone. Because the people around you need you to wake up tomorrow as much as you need them to wake up tomorrow. Because your survival and their survival are not separate things, but the same thing. Because the story that was told tonight and will be told tomorrow night and has been told for as long as anyone can remember says that you belong here, that you have a place, that you matter. The stars above you are the same stars you see now when you manage to get far enough from city lights to see them clearly. The same constellations, the same vast indifference of the universe to your small concerns. But somehow, lying there among your people, with the smell of smoke still in your clothes and the sound of familiar voices nearby, and the stories settling into your mind like seeds into soil, the indifference does not feel terrifying. It feels right. You are small. Your life is brief, and that is okay, because you are part of something larger. The story continues. The people continue. The fire will be rebuilt tomorrow night, and the night after that, and the night after that. You do not have this certainty now. You have instead the freedom to become whoever you want to be, to go wherever you want to go, to believe whatever you want to believe. And that freedom is precious. It is not something to be dismissed or discarded. But it comes at a cost. The cost is the certainty that you have a place. The cost is the feeling of being held. The cost is the kind of peace that comes not from achieving enlightenment or success or self-actualization, but simply from being part of a pattern larger than yourself. Your breathing is slowing now. Your body is relaxing. The thoughts that were racing through your mind are settling, spreading out, becoming less urgent. You are not solving anything. You are not fixing anything. You are simply acknowledging what is true. You are missing something that was once part of the basic fabric of human life. And that is okay. The missing is not a problem to be solved. It is a signal to be heard. A reminder of what you are, what you came from, what your body still expects, even though the world has changed in ways that make those expectations impossible to meet in their original form. The stories your ancestors told around the fire were not true in the way you understand truth now. They were not factually accurate. They were not objective accounts of how things really happened. But they were true in a different way. They were true to the experience of being human, true to the need for meaning, true to the hunger for connection, true to the desire to be part of something that transcends your individual life. You still have that need, that hunger, that desire. The modern world has not erased it. It has only made it harder to satisfy, harder to even recognize. You go through your days feeling like something is missing, but unable to name what it is. You try different things to fill the void: work, entertainment, relationships, achievement, consumption, and all of these things help to some degree. Well, all of them meet real needs. But none of them quite reaches the place the old stories used to reach. The place that needs to feel held by something larger, needs to belong to a narrative that was there before you and will be there after you. Maybe that is okay. Maybe you can live with the hunger. Maybe you can acknowledge it without demanding that it be satisfied in exactly the way it was satisfied for your ancestors. Maybe you can find small moments of the old feeling in new forms. A conversation that goes deep. A piece of music that moves through you and your friends at the same time. A shared experience that becomes a reference point you will return to together for years. These are not the fire circle, but they are something. Small pools of warmth in a cold world. Small islands of connection in a sea of isolation. The silence in your room is still there, but it feels different now. Not wrong exactly, just empty in a way you understand better. The silence is not the enemy. The silence is just silence. What you miss is what used to fill the silence. The voice, the story, the presence of others, the sense of being part of something. You cannot have that tonight, but you can rest knowing that the longing is not madness. It is memory. Not your memory exactly, but the memory your body carries. The memory encoded in your nervous system through millions of years of evolution, hundreds of thousands of years of sitting around fires, thousands of years of slow transition from the old ways to the new. The fire is out now. The coals have gone cold. The darkness is complete. But somewhere, in some deep part of yourself that predates language and thought and individual identity, you remember what it was like when the darkness was not empty, but full of presence and story, and the quiet certainty that you belonged. Let that memory hold you now, not as something to cling to or to mourn, but as something to rest in. You are allowed to miss what you never had. You are allowed to feel the absence of experiences your ancestors took for granted. You are allowed to be shaped by losses that happened generations before you were born. The restlessness will return. Tomorrow night or the night after. The silence will press against you again. The phone will beckon with its promise of connection that never quite connects. The stories you consume will entertain you, but not hold you. This is the condition of modern life. So this is the price of progress. This is what you live with. But tonight, just for now, you can let it go. You can stop searching. You can stop trying to fill the void with more content, more information, more stimulation. You can simply acknowledge that the void is there, that it comes from somewhere real, that the hunger is not your fault. Your ancestors sat around fires and told stories and felt held by something larger than themselves. You are descended from those people. Your body is their body. Your nervous system is their nervous system. The changes happen too fast for evolution to keep up. You are living in a world your biology was not designed for. And so you feel out of place sometimes, restless, hungry for something you cannot name. But you can name it now. You are hungry for the hearth, for the circle, for the story that holds everyone together, for the silence that is not empty, but full, for the sense of belonging to something that was there before you and will be there after you. And naming it is enough for tonight. You do not have to solve it. You do not have to fix the modern world or recreate the ancient one. You just have to acknowledge what is true. The hunger is real. The loss is real. And you are not broken for feeling it. The darkness in your room is different from the darkness outside the fire circle. This darkness is private, personal, illuminated at the touch of a button. That darkness was shared, communal, pushed back only by the collective effort of people who needed each other to survive. But darkness is still darkness, and silence is still silence. And somewhere in both, if you let yourself settle into them, there is rest. Not the rest of having what you need, but the rest of acknowledging what you miss. The rest of letting the longing be what it is without demanding that it be satisfied or dismissed or explained away. Your breathing is deeper now. Your body is heavier. The thoughts are becoming less distinct, less urgent, less coherent. This is how sleep begins. Not with answers, but with letting go of questions. Not with satisfaction, but with acceptance. Not with having what you need, but with resting in the knowledge that the need is real and the hunger is honest and the longing comes from a place of truth. The fire circles are gone. The stories are still being told, but differently, through different media, for different purposes. The belonging your ancestors felt is not available to you in the same form. The world has changed too much. You have changed too much. There is no going back. But there is rest. There is the possibility of peace. Not the peace of having everything you need, but the peace of understanding what you are missing. Not the peace of satisfaction, but the peace of clarity. Not the peace of the fire circle, but the peace of knowing why you miss it, why your body craves it, why the silence feels wrong without it. Let that be enough for tonight. Let the understanding be its own kind of comfort. Let the acknowledgement be its own kind of rest. The stories held the room together. The silence around the hearth was a kind of inclusion deeper than any you can easily find now. The fire has gone out. The circle has dispersed. The old ways are gone. But you are still here, still breathing, still capable of rest, still able to find moments of peace in a world that was not designed to provide them easily. And that will have to be enough. The darkness is soft now. The silence is patient. The restlessness is fading. Let yourself fade with it. Let the longing become part of your rest instead of what prevents it. Let the hunger be acknowledged and then set aside. Let the missing be real and still let yourself sleep. The fire is out. The embers are cold. The story has been told. And you can rest now, knowing what was there, knowing what was lost, knowing that the knowing itself is a kind of holding, a kind of being part of something larger, a kind of story that continues even in the silence, even in the darkness, even in the absence of the fire that once held everything together. Rest now. The knowing is enough. The acknowledgement is enough. The memory that is not memory but something older and deeper than memory is enough. Rest.